Hello and welcome to Hawkeye's Aviation. I'm, of course, Raphael Davey. I'm a future United States Air Force fighter pilot, test pilot, and astronaut, and aviation entrepreneur. Welcome to Lesson 1. We're going to be reviewing the FAA-approved Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. We're going to be going over the introduction of flight. We're also going to be reviewing the history of the Federal Aviation Administration, the history of flight in general, some of the innovations that have propelled the industry forward. Now, without further ado, let's jump to our notes. We're going to start with the history of flight. Why is it that humans desire to fly so much? Well, we always look to God's nature, and what we found is, how is it that birds are able to fly? Have you ever thought that as a child or even as an adult? Comment down below how you got into aviation and let us know. We truly would like to hear. So in this respect, humans look to imitate birds by constructing artificial wings to attach to the human body. Now, of course, this failed miserably. Now, why did this fail miserably? Well, in 1655, Robert Hooke, a mathematician, concluded mathematically that human beings cannot achieve flight via artificial wings. Now, let's think about it. Birds have been developed to fly. They have lots of tiny, intricate muscles in their shoulder joints. They have very specifically designed vascular and respiratory systems to sustain prolonged flapping motions or flight. And of course, human beings have not developed that because we didn't need to. Now, Leonardo da Vinci, the famous mathematician, philosopher, inventor, innovator, and just overall genius, we see in his writings the first designs for artificial flying machines that leverage the flapping motion, as posted on the screen right now. And again, although he was genius, it did fail miserably. The math didn't support it. Now, that same Robert Hooke concluded also that it is required that we have some sort of artificial propulsion method, aka an engine, thrust. In 1783, we're going to skip about 100 years. In 1783, you had the first balloon flight, which solved the vertical axis or the vertical velocity problem of lift. So we were allowed to take an object that weighed and make it lift up. This is the history of the Federal Aviation Administration. In the early years of flying, there was no governing body that wrote regulations ensuring safety, enforcing safety, and reviewing accidents if they were to happen. There was essentially no agency to fall back on. Everything was certainly a free-for-all, and it was very much geared towards the rich. In fact, owning an airplane was likened to owning a Bugatti. It's the same similar thing. Aviation, of course, is extremely expensive. It's the playground for the rich. We just mentioned that. At this time, aviation had no real commercial use case either. There was no way, it hadn't been monetized. It hadn't been proven profitable as a industry, making it unnecessary to regulate for about a 10-year period. From the Wright brothers in 1903, which 10 years later, that all changed in 1913. Now, there was a Florida businessman named P.F. Fansler living in St. Petersburg. And in St. Louis, he contacted Tom Benoist at the Benoist Aircraft Company about starting a flight route from Tampa Bay to St. Petersburg. Now, this was the first commercial use case. This is the establishment of the first airline. The first ticket, this is a fun fact, get this, the first ticket auction was to the mayor of St. Petersburg, A.C. Field, for $400 as the first airline passenger. $400 for a flight ticket back in 1913. Somebody do the math and comment down below how much that would be worth today. Just a few short months later, on January 1st, 1914, the very first ever airline flight was conducted. It was approximately 21 miles, 23 minutes with a solid headwind. The return flight was about 20 minutes. The St. Petersburg-Tampa airboat line continued for approximately 4 months, carrying 1,205 passengers safely, proving the experiment to be a success. Skipping forward to World War I, the airplane got a chance to showcase its varied capabilities to serve as fighters, bombers, in reconnaissance missions, and as trainers. Now, part 3. The next major use case for airplanes was an air mail. Now, this brought interest from the government into the aviation industry because now you're dealing with commerce in the economy. So, the United States Postal Service took over a monopoly of all the air mail routes of 1918, 1919, and 1920 and onwards. And what they did starting in August of 1918, they began bringing the surviving World War I fighter pilots and recruiting them as United States Post USPS employees. Just a short 8 years later, in 1926, the United States Congress passed the Air Commerce Act, which was the cornerstone in U.S. aviation safety and was heavily supported by the aviation industry. Finally, we have somebody to back up and regulate this to make sure that this is safe. Now, this act was passed under the Department of Commerce. This created the aeronautical branch, whose purpose was to provide oversight of the aviation industry and further develop the air commerce industry by create and enforce air traffic rules, pilot licensing standards, aircraft certification standards, establishing airways for navigation, like roads in the air, mapping, and operating and maintaining aids to navigation. With the ever-growing use case of aviation in cargo transport, the aeronautical branch made significant advances in aviation, including radio beacons as effective for navigation purposes. These radio beacons were built at intervals of 10 miles to 51 feet tall and topped with powerful rotating beacon light flashing a code that identified the beacon's number. Now, this is the conclusion of lesson 1. In lesson 2, we're going to be reviewing pilot, mechanic, and aircraft certification standards. Now, this doesn't go without a special shout out to two individuals. That is specifically Steve Shaner and Michael O'Neill. These are certified FAA flight examiners and flight instructor, certified flight instructor instrument, certified flight instructor, multi-engine rating, MEI, and ATP pilots. Now, without further ado, the last shout out that I would like to make is to X-Plane, as this is the flight simulator that I use on all my mobile devices to stay current.